And this is a fascinating story that involves King George III. He is so relevant in history. He was the last king of America. After Queen Victoria and Queen Elizabeth, he was the longest king in the UK. And what is relevant about his history is that in 2015, Queen Elizabeth was able to open the archives and the letters from King George III, and also about the royal doctors that treated King George III. And now looking back to his life, I did his life chart. And here you can see, this is an example of how you can do your own life chart. And you have to first think about relevant moments in your life. When you were born, here you can see when the king's father dies, his grandfather dies, so he becomes king of the United Kingdom. He marries Queen Charlotte. He buys Buckingham Palace. He was actually the one who acquired the Buckingham Palace. His first son is born. And here is his first depressive episode with psychosis. And actually, it was a mixed psychotic episode. And this is the way that you write down all of the relevant things. And you can mix historical parts of your own life when you started college, when you got married, with the crisis, with the moments that you were unable to function. Then I like to make some graphs. And as you may see, here are the big 4 psychotic, manic depressive episodes that the king had. And the last 9 years of his life was when Regency was established. His son was taking the reins because he was declared mentally incapable. And this was because King George III developed this neurodegeneration that is commonly seen in certain patients who are not treated properly. And I also mark in this life chart the periods here, the ones who are looking at the video, the pink areas are the areas in which he was psychotic. So now that you have all of this, now that you have the King George III life chart, and I'm doing this with all respect to the king, you may see how relevant it is to life chart, how much you have to learn about which medication is useful, how are the symptoms presented. For example, here you may see, just by looking about his life, that mania and psychosis was so frequent in his episodes. So if I was in a fantasy, if I was treating King George III, definitely an antipsychotic medication will be very important. He could do great with lithium, with an antipsychotic for those crises. And this is the way that you use life chart in clinical practice.
I love the way that you pulled out some of the key elements of life charting there. One that stood out for me is the importance of looking not just at negative life events or traumas or bad events, but also looking at things that we often view as positive. So holidays, marriages, birth of a child, new job. These, of course, especially in the context of bipolar disorder, can propel people into elevated mood states. And so when you are doing a life chart and looking back at your personal history, taking that lens of the good things and the bad things and making sure those is captured is really important.
It is.
And it must be almost 20 years now since I watched The Madness of King George. I think it was like 1994 or something that came out. And I have believed until then, because it's such a strong part of the narrative, that, and as described in the movie at least, that he was diagnosed and lived with something called, what is it, porphyria? How do you pronounce that? It's a liver metabolic condition, right?
Yeah. Well, this is a very interesting story. And let me go back, way back. When King George III was psychotic, Queen Charlotte and the Queen Mother were able to hide the king from all of the court in order for them not to see him manic or psychotic. And you just think about, he was the most powerful man in the world then. And to show him to the court psychotic and all over the place was critical not to show him. And in 2015, Queen Elizabeth opened the archives of Windsor Castle, and historians and physicians were able to read all the description of the symptoms. And the theory that was initially pushed in 1960, that the king had porphyria, a metabolic illness, was absolutely discarded. There's no symptoms that support porphyria, and there's so much richness talking about mental illness, about an illness compatible with what we call today manic depressive illness, bipolar disorder, especially in the manic psychotic mix area. So what is interesting here is the stigma. For some people was safer to say that the king suffered from porphyria rather than bipolar. And I'm happy that now the history is putting exactly where we know. And I think that King George III is fascinating. He was visionary. He was so important in history. And I'm glad that nowadays we're having the proper record of his mental health.
Thank you. So interesting.
It is fascinating.